Saint Anthony Mary Claret was in Rome 3 times. The first in 1839 to present himself to the Congregation for the Propaganda of the Faith, to be sent anywhere in the world. He returned again to Rome in 1865 to consult with the Holy Father on the subject of the recognition of the Kingdom of Italy. The third trip took place in March of 1869 to take part in the First Vatican Council. In this first walk, we will visit, among others, one of the most important places for Claretians, the novitiate of the Jesuits. Enjoy the walk. The itinerary of the first walk is from the Barberini Piazza to Via del Corso. We start at the church and convent of San Basilio, St. Basil, and from there we go up to the church of St. Andrew at the Quirinal. We go down to the church of San Vitale. We go up again to visit the palace of the Quirinal. From there, the long walk takes us to the church of Saints Vicente and Anastasio by the Trevi Fountain. We walk to the Spanish Steps and we find the palace of Propaganda Fide. In the Spanish Plaza, we visit the so-called Palace of Spain, and from there go along the Via del Corso to the church and hospital of Santiago in Agosta, where our walk ends. We can start in Piazza Barberini, where the Triton fountain by Bernini is located. The square is the point where several important streets lead off, such as Via Veneto, Via del Triton, and Via Barberini. The square takes its name from the Barberini family, whose palace is located nearby, and look for Via di San Basilio. On the right, we find the church and convent of St. Basil. The church is dedicated to St. Basil, the Bishop of Caesarea in Cappadocia, founder of the Basilian order.
It was built by the Abbot General of the Basilian Order of Italy, Don Apollinare Agresta, whose coat of arms can be seen on the arches of the church. Inside, a marble plaque confirms the construction. Of particular historical interest is the characteristic altar covered with precious icons, with numerous portraits of Jesus, Mary, and other saints, and in the upper part, in a central position, one can admire the Last Supper. There is an adjoining hostelry of the Italo-Greek College of Basilian Monks of Grottaferrata, who had it restored in 1682, as can be read on the inscription on the entrance door. Today, the church is still managed by the Italian Basilian Order of Grottaferrata, as is part of the attached college, while the rest is owned by the Italian state.
At that time, it was the residence of the Spanish seminarians in Rome. Due to the political situation in Spain, many seminarians could not be ordained in their own diocese, as the Spanish bishops were forbidden to confer holy orders. And so, once they had finished their studies, many ordinands crossed the border and sought bishops in the south of France or in Rome. These were housed at St. Basil's. Claret went to stay there as soon as he arrived in Rome for the first time on October 6, 1839, accompanied by Father Cosmas, superior of the Carmelite convent of Santa Maria in Traspontina, an hour away. A few days later, he left for San Eusebio to make the spiritual exercises. Among the seminarians at St. Basil's was José Cheffrey, the future co-founder and superior general of the Claretian Missionaries, who was then 22 years old. Domingo Fábregas, the future co-founder, arrived in Rome at the beginning of 1840 to be ordained. He also stayed at San Basilio. From there, we can go down to Piazza Barberini and take Via del Quattro Fontane, which goes up to Via del Quirinale. Leaving Palazzo Barberini on the left, we reach Via delle Quattro Fontane, and passing the church of San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, a work by Borromini, we arrive at the church of San Andrea al Quirinale. The church was designed by Bernini and built between 1658 and 1670. The interior is rich in marble, gilded stucco, and paintings. It is considered one of the jewels of Italian Baroque. On the main altar, we can see the martyrdom of St. Andrew by Il Borgognone.
The second chapel on the left is dedicated to St. Stanislaus Kostka, a Polish Jesuit novice who died at the age of 19, whose remains are in a bronze and lapis lazuli urn under the altar. The painting on the altar is by Carlo Maratta and depicts the apparition of the Virgin to the saint. In the aisle to the left of the altar is a monument dedicated to Charles Emmanuel IV of Savoy, who abdicated the throne of Sardinia to enter the Society of Jesus. Next to the church was the Jesuit novitiate, now the Secretariat of the Presidency, founded on September 20th, 1566, the general of the society being, at the time, St. Francis Borgia. It began to function as a novitiate in June 1569. St. Francis Borgia himself, St. Aloysius Gonzaga, and St. Stanislaus Kostka resided here. St. Robert Bellarmine used to retire here for a month every summer. In 1839, the house was surrounded by vineyards, orchards, and some small olive trees.
In 1839, when Claret arrived on October 29th, the community numbered 121 members, of whom 77 were novices. Claret himself writes in an autograph,
"On October 29th, 1839, I entered the society, and on November 13th, 1839, I was given the habit. On November 2nd, I was already living in the novitiate, so that overnight I was a Jesuit."
On November 11th, 2 days before the beginning of his novitiate, the postulant Claret was asked to write in his own handwriting and in Latin, in a book entitled Informationes Novitiorum S.J., a summary of his life up to that point. This page begins with 3 words, Ego Antonius Claret, and is like his first autobiography.
During the 3 years I was there, I saw clearly, with a superior light, the deceitfulness of worldly things, and so, after careful thought and consideration, I decided to leave everything and follow Christ in the clerical state, for which I studied the Latin grammar in the same city of Barcelona for another year, my teacher being Don Francisco Artigas, Royal Master. I enjoy good health, I am of short stature, and I am not very easy to remember. I am very much inclined to spiritual exercises, especially to visit the sick, to hear confessions, and to exhort people. So much so that in these exercises I am tireless, as I myself have experienced in these last 4 years.
Due to various circumstances, he left the novitiate in February of 1840. From May 1866, this Jesuit novitiate house became the Pio Latin American College, and here in 1870, on May 30th, Claret came again as Archbishop to celebrate Mass and preach to the students. Eduardo Huerte y Silva, Bishop of Goiás, and Uberaba recalled this meeting in 1907.
During the whole Mass, I could not take my eyes off that distinguished prelate who, small in stature, seemed to me to be a giant in holiness. With me also received communion from his hands, and Cardinal Joaquin Acoverde, Archbishop of Rio de Janeiro, Jerónimo Tomás de Silva, Archbishop of Bahia, Francisco de Rego y Maia, Bishop of Nicopolis.
Leaving the church of the novitiate, we turn into Via del Quirinal and start to short walk. Going down Via Genova, we reach Via Nazionale, and shortly after, turning left, we go down towards the Church of San Vitale. Next to the orchard of the Jesuit novitiate was the Church of San Vitale, erected in 402 in the form of a basilica. It is one of the oldest churches in Rome. The facade is simple and has an early Christian portico. The interior has a single nave with 17th century paintings. Andrea Comodi frescoed the apse with the scene of the fall of Jesus under the cross and scenes from the martyrdom of Saints Gervase and Protasius.
It was restored in 1859. Clement VIII joined it to Sant'Andrea in 1595. The paintings that decorate it depict motifs of martyrdom, intended to prepare the spirit of the Jesuit missionaries leaving for mission lands.
At the end of the 16th century, in 1595, Clement VIII gave the basilica to the Society of Jesus to serve as part of their nearby novitiate. Jesuit novices went down to this church to teach catechism and preach to the people. The novice Claret also ministered here. At the exit of the church, and before going up the long and steep staircase, you can admire the beautiful portal with the coat of arms of Sixtus IV. It is one of the noblest of the early Roman Renaissance. Although the precious 17th century relief panels have been removed from the wooden doors and placed in a more secure location. Once on Via Nazionale, we return to Via del Quirinale to visit the Palazzo del Quirinale in front of the Church of Sant'Andrea. On the highest of Rome's 7 hills, where the Temple of Quirinus once stood, is the Quirinal Palace. Gregory VIII began its construction in 1574 to convert it into a summer residence, and it was not completed until the pontificate of Clement XII 1730 to 1740.
The facade and atrium are by Domenico Fontana. The chapel, the same size as the Sistine Chapel, is by the architect Maderno. And the part of the building facing the Via del Quirinale is by Bernini. It was the residence of the popes until 1870, and then of the kings of Italy until 1946, after which it became the seat of the presidency of the Italian Republic.
Claret came to this palace on November 7, 1865, to obtain a private audience with Pius IX in order to consult with him on whether or not he should continue as confessor to Queen Elizabeth II, since she had given her consent to the recognition of the Kingdom of Italy, which meant the loss of the Papal States. Claret wrote the same day to the nuncio that His Holiness,
He received me with many demonstrations and proofs of affection, and told me that that same day he had received a letter from Her Majesty the Queen of Spain, in which she asked him to order me to return to her side as confessor. But the Holy Father told me that for the moment he would neither order me nor advise me to do so, but to wait 1 or 2 weeks, that meanwhile he would think about what to do, pray to the Lord, and then tell me.
Again, on Saturday, April 24th, Pius IX received Claret in a private audience in the Quirinal Palace. The Pope received him with great affection and kindness.
He always said to me, "My dear, I know the calumnies and bad things that have been said against you. I have already read them." Then he began to quote the authorities of Holy Scripture and very strong reasons to console me. But thank God, I was and am very calm. When the Pope had finished speaking, I answered him, "Holy Father, the disciple must not be more respected than his master, nor the servant more than his Lord."
Going down Via del Dattaria, we come to Via di San Vincenzo on the right. Here we come to the beautiful Piazza where the famous Trevi Fountain is located. Just off the piazza on the right is the Church of St. Vincent and Anastasius, with one of the most beautiful Baroque facades in Rome.
Cardinal Mazzarino, whose coat of arms crowns the numerous columns on the facade, had it rebuilt in 1650.
In this church, with more than 100 bishops, Claret took part in the funeral of the Bishop of Lleida, Spain, Don Mariano Pujar, who died during the council. Taking the Via della Stamperia, we cross the wide Via del Tritone and take the Via del Nazareno and then the Via di Sant'Andrea. Leaving the Church of Sant'Andrea della Frate on the right, where there are 2 beautiful angelic sculptures by Bernini, and the house where he lived on the left, we reach Via di Propaganda Fide, where the Palace of Propaganda Fide is located. In 1644, at the request of Pope Urban VIII, Bernini began the construction of this palace. The facade facing the Piazza di Spagna is his.
In 1646, Borromini also intervened, creating the facade facing Via di Propaganda, which alternates concave and convex forms, columns and pillars with circular windows. The Chapel of the Magi is also his. The Spanish Cardinal Vives donated it to Gregory XV to found a center for priests to study the promotion and propagation of the Christian faith.
Claret went to this palace on October the 8th, 1839, with the intention of meeting the Cardinal Prefect of Propaganda Fide and offering himself to be assigned to the missions. But the Cardinal was away from Rome for the whole month of October. This unsuccessful visit opened the way for him to the Society of Jesus. We can now go toward the Spanish Steps, where on the left and in front of the statue of the Immaculate Conception is the Palace of Spain. This is the seat of the country's embassy to the Holy See. It is the work of the architect A. del Grande of 1647.
It has a severe facade with twin portals joined by a single architrave.
Because of his return to Spain after his experience in the Society of Jesus on March 7, 1840, Claret went to the embassy to ask the person in charge of correspondence and the general agency to issue the passport he had brought with him from France. We can extend the walk by crossing the Piazza di Spagna, by the steps of Trinità dei Monti. We take Via del Barberini and turn left into the Via di San Giacomo. In Via del Corso, we find the church and hospital of Santiago in Augusta. It is a church and hospital complex also known as de los Incurables.
It dates back to the 4th century, but the church was restored in the 16th century. Its facade was begun by Francesco da Volterra, who built the lower part, but was completed in 1600 by Carlo Maderno, whose distinctive feature is the central balcony with the shell-shaped niche. The plan of the church is elliptical, with 3 chapels on each side and a grandiose vault. The adjacent hospital was founded in 1336 by Cardinal Colonna and restored between 1831 and 1846. It had 2 wings, one for men and one for women, with a special section for women with syphilis. In 1839, there was a daily average of about 280 patients.
Claret went to this hospital every Friday, along with other Jesuit novice priests. And this is where we end this first walk. If we continue a little further along Via del Corso, we can see one of the most famous squares in Rome, the Piazza del Popolo. We hope you have enjoyed this walk.